My name is Harper Lane. For 8 years, I dedicated my life to neurosite systems as head of automation compliance. I built the ethical standards that guided our pioneering medical technology. What no one knew was that I was more than just another corporate cog. Far more. I still remember the exact moment my world changed. It was a Friday afternoon in late autumn, Seattle's perpetual drizzle painting gray streaks across my office window. The calendar notification had appeared with startling abruptness. Meeting with HR, 4:30 p.m. No agenda, no explanation. Just the kind of meeting no one wants at the end of a work week. "Harper, please take a seat," said Marissa, the HR director, her face a practiced mask of professional sympathy. Next to her sat Blake Soren, our new CTO, the 36-year-old visionary who'd arrived 3 months ago with his perfectly tailored suits and Silicon Valley swagger. "We're implementing some structural changes," Marissa continued, her voice adopting that particular tone reserved for delivering bad news. "As part of our new automation initiative, we're consolidating several departments." Blake leaned forward, his expression a strange mixture of excitement and performative regret. "Your position as head of automation compliance is being absorbed into our new AI governance structure," he said, effective immediately. I sat perfectly still, feeling a strange sort of calm descend over me. "I see. And who will be handling the compliance protocols I've developed?" Blake's smile widened. "That's the exciting part, Harper. We've partnered with Aurora Praxis Corporation on an AI compliance system called Aegis X. It's revolutionary, capable of processing regulatory updates, monitoring implementation, and flagging potential issues at a fraction of the cost and time of a human team." The irony was almost too perfect. I kept my face neutral as I absorbed his words. "You're replacing me with a robot." "Not replacing," Blake corrected quickly. "Evolving. This is innovation, Harper, the future of healthcare technology." I nodded slowly, already thinking several steps ahead. "And my team?" "Most positions will be eliminated," Marissa said softly. "We're offering generous severance packages." "I see." I straightened in my chair. "When do I need to clear out my office?" "Today would be best," Blake replied. "Security will assist you." As I packed my personal items under the watchful eye of a security guard, a humiliating ritual I'd seen inflicted on others but never expected to experience myself, I maintained a facade of dignified acceptance. Inside, however, I was already calculating my next move. Because there was something Blake Soren and everyone else at Neurosite didn't know. Something that would change everything. They didn't know that I owned Aurora Praxis Corporation, the very company that had built the robot they were using to replace me. The story of how I came to control Aurora Praxis began 4 years earlier, in the aftermath of personal tragedy. My brother Michael had been a brilliant robotics engineer, passionate, innovative, and perpetually underestimated. When a climbing accident took his life at 33, I inherited his modest estate, including a small stake in Aurora Praxis, the struggling robotics firm where he'd worked. At the time, Aurora Praxis was fighting to survive. Their innovations were groundbreaking, but their business acumen was lacking. I initially planned to sell the shares, a practical decision to fund a memorial foundation in Michael's name. But before proceeding, I did what I always do: thorough research. What I discovered changed everything. Aurora Praxis wasn't just another tech startup. They were developing adaptive robotics with applications that could revolutionize healthcare. The work resonated with me on a profound level. It was exactly the kind of technology that might have saved my brother if it had existed when doctors missed crucial warning signs before approving his medical clearance for climbing. More importantly, I saw what others didn't. Aurora Praxis wasn't failing because their technology was flawed. They were failing because they lacked strategic direction and the regulatory expertise to navigate the complex healthcare market. I made a decision then that would alter the trajectory of my life. Instead of selling Michael's shares, I leveraged every financial resource I had, liquidating investments, taking a second mortgage on my house, and established a shell company called Hollow Ridge Partners. Through this entity, I quietly began acquiring Aurora Praxis stock as it continued to plummet. Within 6 months, when Aurora Praxis faced a critical cash flow crisis, Hollow Ridge Partners stepped in with a lifeline investment that gave me 51% controlling ownership. I installed competent management but remained anonymous, operating through legal proxies and maintaining my position at Neurosight. It was never about ego or public recognition. It was about ensuring my brother's vision was realized responsibly. For years, I maintained this careful separation. At Neurosight, I was simply Harper Lane, dedicated compliance executive. No one knew that in boardrooms across town. My directives shaped the development of some of the most advanced robotic systems in the industry. Until now, this double life had been manageable. But as I carried my box of personal items out of Neurosight's gleaming headquarters that rainy Friday afternoon, I knew the time for separation was over. Back in my Fremont apartment, I poured a glass of Macallan 18, Michael's favorite, and opened my laptop. The Aurora Praxis Executive Portal required 3 separate authentication factors. Once logged in, I navigated to the Secure Board Documents section. There it was, a comprehensive partnership agreement between Aurora Praxis and Neurosight Systems, centered around the Aegis X platform, the very system designed to replace me. The contract was awaiting final board approval on Monday morning. I spent the weekend meticulously reviewing every clause, every appendix, every financial projection. What emerged was a troubling picture. Blake Soren had negotiated terms that were extremely favorable to Neurosight, extracting technology and intellectual property from Aurora Praxis at rates well below market value. Several patent ownership clauses were particularly concerning, designed to gradually transfer key innovations from Aurora Praxis to Neurosight. By Sunday evening, my strategy was clear. I contacted Aurora Praxis's legal counsel and scheduled my first in-person appearance at a board meeting. Monday morning would mark the end of my anonymity and the beginning of my response. The Aurora Praxis headquarters occupied a renovated industrial building in South Lake Union. As I walked through the lobby, no one recognized me. Why would they? The receptionist smiled politely when I gave my name, then did a double take when she checked her system. Ms. Lane, as in Hollow Ridge Partners? Her eyes widened slightly. Yes, I replied simply. I believe they're expecting me in the boardroom. The expression on the board members' faces when I entered the room was worth every penny I'd invested. Most had never met the reclusive majority owner who operated through lawyers and written directives. Now they were faced with a woman in her late 30s whom none of them recognized. Good morning, I said, taking my place at the head of the table. I'm Harper Lane, CEO of Hollow Ridge Partners and majority shareholder of Aurora Praxis. I believe we have an important contract to discuss today. After a moment of stunned silence, the meeting began. I listened as the executive team presented the Neurosight partnership, highlighting the prestige and market visibility it would bring. When they finished, I spoke calmly and clearly. I appreciate the thoroughness of your presentation. However, I cannot approve this agreement in its current form. The terms are unbalanced, the intellectual property protections insufficient, and the compensation structure inadequate. The CFO cleared his throat. Ms. Lane, with all due respect, this partnership represents a major opportunity for Aurora Praxis to establish itself in the healthcare AI market. I'm intimately familiar with the healthcare AI market, I replied. And I'm equally familiar with Neurosight Systems. In fact, until Friday afternoon, I was their head of automation compliance. Another shocked silence fell over the room. What I can tell you, I continued, is that there are significant unresolved compliance issues with the Aegis X implementation at Neurosight. Issues that were systematically dismissed by their current CTO, Blake Soren. Issues that could expose Aurora Praxis to substantial regulatory and legal liability. I opened my laptop and displayed several internal Neurosight documents, my own compliance reports that had been buried by Blake over the past 2 months. As majority owner of this company, I will not authorize a partnership that exposes us to these risks. Furthermore, I have reason to believe that Neurosight's current leadership is attempting to acquire our core technology at a fraction of its value. By the meeting's end, I had achieved unanimous board support for my position. Aurora Praxis would suspend the Neurosight agreement pending a comprehensive legal and compliance review. As the board members filed out, I received a text from my former executive assistant at Neurosight. Blake just announced the Aurora Praxis partnership to the entire company. Champagne in the atrium at 11. I smiled to myself. Perfect timing. At precisely 11:15 a.m., Blake Soren strode confidently into the Aurora Praxis reception area, flanked by Neurosight's general counsel and chief financial officer. I watched on the security feed as they were escorted to the main conference room where I waited alone. The look on Blake's face when he saw me sitting there was everything I'd imagined it would be. Confusion, followed by recognition, followed by the first flickers of alarm. "Harper, what are you doing here?" I gestured to the chairs across from me. "Please, sit down. We have some matters to discuss regarding the partnership between Neurosight Systems and Aurora Praxis." Blake laughed uncertainly. "I think there's been some confusion. We're here to meet with Aurora Praxis leadership about finalizing our agreement." "You are meeting with Aurora Praxis leadership," I replied calmly. "I own 51% of this company." The blood drained from Blake's face as the implications hit him. The general counsel, Andrea Novak, recovered more quickly. "Ms. Lane, regardless of your position here, Neurosight has a binding preliminary agreement with Aurora Praxis for the Aegis X system, an agreement your board has already approved in principle." I slid 3 copies of a document across the table. "Actually, this morning the board voted to suspend that agreement pending a full compliance and legal review. These are the official notifications." Blake snatched up one of the documents, scanning it frantically. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this." "I can and I have," I replied. "As it happens, I have serious concerns about Neurosight's implementation plans for Aegis X, particularly regarding patient data handling protocols and clinical decision support safeguards, concerns that were documented repeatedly during my tenure and systematically ignored." The CFO, Howard Chen, spoke for the first time. "Are you suggesting this is some sort of retaliation for your termination?" "Not at all," I said. "I'm exercising my fiduciary responsibility to Aurora Praxis. The fact that I have first-hand knowledge of compliance violations at Neurosight simply puts me in a uniquely informed position." Blake slammed his hand on the table. "This is extortion. We'll fight this." "You're welcome to try," I replied. "But before you do, you should know that I've already forwarded anonymized versions of my compliance reports to several regulatory bodies. Given recent scrutiny of AI in healthcare, I imagine they'll find the material quite compelling." By the time they left, Blake furious, Andrea calculating, Howard visibly shaken, the message was clear. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Back at my apartment that evening, I received a call from Eliza Wong, Aurora Praxis's COO. "The board is impressed, Ms. Lane," she said. "Though I think stunned might be a better word. May I ask why you maintained your anonymity all this time?" "It wasn't about secrecy for its own sake," I explained. "I believed Aurora Praxis needed leadership that understood both the technology and the regulatory landscape, but I wanted the company's success to be based on its innovations, not on my personal involvement. And now circumstances have changed. Neurosight represents both a threat and an opportunity. Their approach under Blake Soren is dangerously cavalier, but their market position and resources are significant." "What exactly are you proposing?" "A full strategic review," I said. "I want to understand every aspect of Neurosight's business, their vulnerabilities, their assets, their true value." "You're considering an acquisition," Eliza stated, not a question. "I'm considering all options," I replied. "But yes, that's one possibility. Blake Soren believes automation should replace human judgment. I intend to show him just how wrong he is." The next 2 weeks unfolded with surprising speed. As news of the suspended partnership spread, Neurocyte's stock began a steady decline. Regulatory inquiries, sparked by my anonymous tips, led to uncomfortable public scrutiny. Key clients, already nervous about AI implementation in healthcare, began putting projects on hold. Meanwhile, I emerged fully as the controlling owner of Aurora Praxis. I established an office at headquarters and began working directly with the executive team. My years at Neurocyte had given me intimate knowledge of their operations, their client relationships, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Blake Soren attempted damage control through increasingly desperate measures. He publicly dismissed the regulatory concerns as fear-mongering and the partnership suspension as a temporary setback. He accelerated Neurocyte's internal automation initiatives, announcing plans to develop an in-house alternative to Aegis X. What he failed to understand was that Aurora Praxis held several crucial patents that would make any such alternative legally problematic. Patents that I had specifically encouraged the company to secure years earlier. Anticipating exactly this kind of scenario. 17 days after my dismissal from Neurocyte, I received a call from Cassandra Bell, the chairwoman of Neurocyte's board. "Ms. Lane," she began without preamble. "This situation has become untenable. I'd like to meet privately to discuss a resolution." We agreed to meet at a discreet wine bar in Capitol Hill, away from the corporate environments where we might be recognized. Cassandra was waiting when I arrived, a glass of Bordeaux already in front of her. "I'll be direct," she said after we exchanged brief pleasantries. "Blake Soren made a serious error in judgment regarding both your termination and the Aurora Praxis partnership. The board was not fully informed of the compliance concerns you had raised." I took a sip of my wine. "That doesn't surprise me." "We're prepared to make changes," Cassandra continued. "Blake's position is under review. We'd like to reinstate the partnership with Aurora Praxis under revised terms. And we'd be open to discussing your return to Neurocyte in an expanded role." I studied her carefully. Cassandra Bell was no fool. She was a seasoned corporate operator who had survived multiple leadership transitions. This offer wasn't about making amends, it was about damage control. "That's a generous proposal," I replied. "But I'm afraid the situation has evolved beyond that point. Aurora Praxis has conducted a thorough analysis of Neurocyte's position. We believe there's a different path forward that would better serve both companies." I outlined the plan I had developed with Aurora Praxis's executive team. A reverse acquisition in which Aurora Praxis would purchase Neurocyte systems, combining the companies under unified leadership with a renewed commitment to responsible innovation. Cassandra's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. The board would never approve a complete takeover. "It wouldn't be presented as a takeover," I explained. "It would be a merger that happens to result in Aurora Praxis as the controlling entity. Neurocyte's shareholders would receive a premium on their current stock value, which, as you know, has declined significantly in recent weeks. And Blake would not be part of the combined organization." Cassandra took a long drink of her wine. "You've thought this through thoroughly." "I've had time to consider my options." What followed was a 3-week period of intense negotiation. Cassandra proved to be a formidable advocate for Neurocyte's interests, but she was also a realist. As regulatory pressure mounted and client confidence continued to erode, the appeal of a clean solution grew. Blake fought the merger proposal viciously, attempting to rally support among board members and investors. But his position weakened daily as the consequences of his decisions became increasingly apparent. The final blow came when one of Neurocyte's flagship healthcare clients suspended their contract, citing concerns about compliance protocols, concerns I had documented months earlier. 62 days after being told my position was redundant, I stood at a podium in Neurocyte's atrium, the same space where Blake had prematurely celebrated the Aurora Praxis partnership. Employees gathered around, many of them former colleagues who had watched me leave with a box of personal belongings just 2 months earlier. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter," I announced. "The merger of Neurocyte Systems and Aurora Praxis creates an organization uniquely positioned to advance healthcare technology with responsibility and purpose at its core." I didn't mention Blake Soren, who had been terminated for cause the previous day. Nor did I dwell on the circumstances that had led to this moment. Instead, I focused on the future. A future where innovation and ethical considerations would advance hand in hand. As I concluded my remarks and the crowd dispersed, I found myself face to face with Marissa from HR, the same woman who had delivered the news of my termination. "Ms. Lane," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say, that is, I hope there are no hard feelings about the previous situation." I smiled. "No hard feelings, Marissa. In fact, I should thank you. Sometimes we need to lose our place to find our power." I walked through the familiar corridors of Neurosight, now part of a larger entity under my leadership, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. It wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in the outcome. It was about something more fundamental, the recognition that true innovation doesn't come from replacing human judgment with automation, but from harnessing technology to enhance our human capabilities. In my new office, considerably larger than my previous one, I found a small package waiting on the desk. Inside was a sleek model of the Aegis X robot, the very system that had been intended to replace me. Attached was a note from Eliza. "Thought you might want a souvenir. The machine works for you now." I placed the model on a shelf where it would serve as a daily reminder of an essential truth. In a world increasingly dominated by technology, the most powerful force remains human ingenuity and the courage to use it. They replaced me with a robot, so I bought the robot's parent company. And now the machine works for me. But this was just the beginning. The real work of transformation lay ahead. The first 6 months following the merger were a whirlwind of activity. Integrating two companies with different cultures and systems is never simple. And the healthcare technology sector presented additional regulatory complexities. I assembled a leadership team that balanced technical expertise with ethical awareness, drawing talent from both Neurosight and Aurora Praxis. The Aegis X platform, originally designed to replace human compliance officers like me, underwent a complete redesign. Rather than eliminating human oversight, the new version was explicitly built to augment human decision-making, providing data analysis and regulatory tracking while leaving critical judgments to experienced professionals. Not everyone embraced the new direction. Several executives from Blake's tenure resigned, uncomfortable with what they perceived as a step backward from full automation. I didn't try to stop them. The vision I was implementing required believers, not reluctant participants. One morning, about 8 months after the merger, I arrived at the office to find an unexpected visitor waiting in the reception area. Dr. Evelyn Choi, the FDA's recently appointed Director of Emerging Technology Oversight. "Ms. Lane," she said, rising to greet me. "I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit. I happened to be in Seattle for a conference, and I wanted to see firsthand what you're building here." I gave Dr. Choi a comprehensive tour of our facilities, including the innovation lab where the next generation of healthcare robotics was taking shape. Unlike previous iterations that focused primarily on replacing human tasks, these systems were designed for collaborative interaction, enhancing human capabilities rather than eliminating human roles. This is a significant departure from the industry trend, Dr. Choi observed as we watched a demonstration of a surgical assistance robot. "Most of your competitors are racing toward full automation." "They're solving for efficiency," I replied. "We're solving for effectiveness. There's a difference." Dr. Choi nodded thoughtfully. "The regulatory framework is still catching up to these technologies. We're seeing concerning patterns in fully automated systems, subtle biases, unexplainable decisions, accountability gaps." Exactly the issues I was flagging before the merger, I said. "Technology can process information at speeds humans can't match, but human judgment brings contextual understanding that AI still lacks. The sweet spot is meaningful collaboration between the two." As we concluded the tour, Dr. Choi paused. "Your approach is gaining attention, Ms. Lane. There's growing interest in what some are calling the Neurosight Aurora model of human-centered automation. The secretary has asked me to convene an advisory panel on next-generation healthcare AI. We'd value your participation. The invitation was significant, a chance to shape regulatory approaches at the national level. It was also validation of the path I'd chosen, a path that had once made me an outlier in my own company. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from Blake Soren. Since his departure, he had launched a venture capital fund focused on automation technologies. His message was brief and surprisingly conciliatory. Harper, I underestimated you, and I misunderstood what you were trying to protect at Neurosight. Recent developments have given me reason to reconsider some of my assumptions about AI governance. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss these matters in person if you're willing. Blake. I contemplated ignoring the message. Blake had dismissed my expertise, eliminated my position, and actively undermined the compliance structures I'd built. But curiosity won out. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near our headquarters. Blake looked different, less polished, more thoughtful. The swagger that had defined him during his brief tenure at Neurosight was noticeably diminished. Thank you for meeting me, he began. I'll be direct. One of my portfolio companies recently faced regulatory action over an AI implementation similar to what I was planning at Neurosight. The issues were exactly what you predicted in your compliance reports, the ones I dismissed. I waited, letting the admission hang in the air between us. I've been following what you're doing with the merged company, he continued. The human augmentation approach, the ethics-first development model, it's compelling. And the market is responding positively. What exactly are you proposing, Blake? He leaned forward. A collaboration. My fund has access to promising startups in the automation space. Many of them have brilliant technology but limited understanding of governance and compliance. Your expertise in those areas, combined with your vision for human-centered systems, could be transformative. I studied him carefully, looking for signs of the old Blake, the opportunist who saw compliance as an obstacle to be overcome. What I saw instead was something closer to genuine recognition. Send me information on these startups, I said finally. I'll consider it. As I walked back to the office, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Being replaced had forced me to access a power I'd always possessed but never fully wielded. The very crisis that had seemed like an ending had instead triggered a beginning, not just for me personally, but potentially for a new approach to technology itself. Over the following year, the merged company continued to evolve. We expanded into new areas of healthcare technology while maintaining our core principle. Technology should enhance human capability, not replace it. Our financial performance validated the approach. Revenues grew steadily, and our stock price outperformed industry averages. More significantly, our model began to influence the broader conversation around automation and AI. The augmentation versus replacement debate gained prominence in industry publications, conference panels, and policy discussions. Our case studies demonstrating improved outcomes through human-machine collaboration were widely cited. The advisory panel Dr. Choi had invited me to join produced a framework for evaluating healthcare AI systems that heavily emphasized transparency, human oversight, and contextual judgment, all principles that had been at the core of my compliance work at Neurosight. Ironically, the robot that had been designed to replace me had become the catalyst for my greatest professional impact. By owning both the problem and the solution, literally and figuratively, I had transformed a personal setback into systemic change. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after my dismissal from Neurosight, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly results when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Cassandra Bell, the former Neurosight board chair who had negotiated the merger. Harper, she said warmly as she entered. The place looks different. You've made substantive changes. Not just cosmetic ones, I replied with a smile. What brings you here, Cassandra? Last I heard, you were enjoying retirement in Portugal. She settled into a chair opposite my desk. Semi-retirement, I still serve on a few boards, including one that I think might interest you. the National Commission on Workforce Automation. I'm familiar with it, I said. The commission had been established to address the economic and social implications of widespread workplace automation. They're preparing recommendations for a regulatory framework, Cassandra explained. Much of the discussion has centered on slowing automation to protect jobs, but I've been telling them about a different model. Your model, technology that enhances human capability rather than simply replacing it. And they're receptive. They're intrigued. They'd like you to testify at their next public hearing. I considered the opportunity. 2 years ago, I had been fighting a defensive battle within one company. Now I had a chance to influence national policy. I'll do it, I said. But I want to bring more than just testimony. I want to show them what's possible. In the weeks that followed, I worked with our team to prepare a comprehensive presentation for the commission. We documented case studies showing how our human augmentation approach had not only maintained employment, but had actually created new categories of jobs, roles that leveraged uniquely human skills while being enhanced by technology. The hearing took place in Washington, D.C., in a grand committee room filled with policymakers, industry representatives, and media. As I took my place at the witness table, I caught sight of a familiar face in the audience, Blake Soren. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Ms. Mullane, began the commission chair, your company has taken a different approach to automation than many of your industry peers. Could you explain the philosophy behind this strategy and its practical implications? I leaned toward the microphone. Our approach begins with a simple question. What do humans do best, and what do machines do best? Rather than assuming machines should replace humans wherever possible, we look for the optimal integration of both. For the next 3 hours, I outlined our model, answered questions, and presented evidence of its effectiveness. The commissioners were particularly interested in our internal metrics showing that human-machine teams consistently outperformed either humans or machines operating independently. This is not about preserving jobs for sentimental reasons, I emphasized. It's about recognizing that true innovation comes from combining technological capability with human insight. When we rush to eliminate the human element, we often lose more than we gain. As the hearing concluded, several commissioners approached to continue the conversation, as did representatives from other technology companies. The dialogue I had started was spreading beyond my own organization. Later that evening, at a reception following the hearing, Blake Soren approached me. Impressive testimony, he said. You've built something remarkable out of our conflict. It wasn't about the conflict, I replied. It was about a fundamental difference in vision. You saw humans as inefficiencies to be eliminated. I saw them as essential partners in progress. Blake nodded slowly. I've come to appreciate your perspective. In fact, my new fund's investment thesis has shifted significantly. We're now focusing on what we call collaborative automation, systems designed to work with humans rather than replace them. Sounds familiar, I said with a slight smile. You were ahead of your time, he acknowledged. I was too caught up in conventional thinking about efficiency metrics, but the data from your approach is compelling. The market is starting to recognize it. As Blake moved away to join another conversation, I found myself reflecting on the strange symmetry of our journeys. His decision to replace me had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately transformed not just my career, but potentially the direction of an entire industry. The following day, before returning to Seattle, I visited the National Archives. Standing before the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, I thought about how technological revolutions throughout history have tested our fundamental values. The current AI revolution was no different. It challenged us to define the proper relationship between human judgment and machine efficiency. Back at headquarters, I convened our leadership team to discuss expanding our approach beyond healthcare into other sectors where human-machine collaboration could deliver superior results. The model we had developed had applications in fields ranging from education to environmental management to criminal justice. Any domain where context, ethics, and human experience mattered alongside data and algorithms. 3 years to the day after being told my position was redundant, I stood on a different stage, delivering a keynote address at the Global Technology Ethics Summit. Looking out at the audience of industry leaders, policymakers, and technologists, I saw not just listeners but potential collaborators in reshaping the relationship between humans and machines. The greatest threat automation poses, I told them, is not to jobs, but to judgment, to the uniquely human capacity to understand context, to weigh values, to consider implications beyond immediate efficiency. When we surrender judgment to algorithms, we don't just eliminate roles, we eliminate wisdom. The response was overwhelming, not universal agreement, certainly, but genuine engagement with the vision I presented. Several major technology companies expressed interest in adopting elements of our human augmentation approach, and a consortium of universities proposed a research partnership to further develop the model. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an alert about a just-published profile in the Wall Street Journal, a feature on the growing influence of our human-centered automation philosophy. The headline read, "The Woman Who Owned the Robot: How Harper Lane is Rewriting the Rules of Automation." I smiled at the irony. When Blake had told me I was being replaced by a robot, it had seemed like the end of something. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more significant than either of us could have imagined. That evening, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to review our latest project, an adaptive AI system designed to help physicians make better diagnostic decisions while preserving their ultimate clinical judgment. As the prototype demonstration played on my screen, I thought about my brother Michael, whose vision for robotics had always been about enhancing human capability, not diminishing it. My phone rang. Eliza Wong, now our Chief Innovation Officer. "Harper, have you seen the journal piece? We're already getting calls from potential partners." "I've seen it," I replied. "It's gratifying to see the model gaining traction." "It's more than traction," Eliza said. "It's becoming a movement. The human-centered approach is resonating far beyond our industry. People are hungry for a vision of technology that doesn't treat humans as obsolete." After we hung up, I walked to the window of my hotel room, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the long journey from that rainy Friday afternoon when I'd carried my belongings out of Neurosight in a cardboard box. The irony wasn't lost on me. Being replaced by a robot had ultimately enabled me to shape how robots would be integrated into countless workplaces. Losing my position had led me to claim my power. Being dismissed had given me a platform to be heard. As I turned away from the window, my gaze fell on the small model of the Aegis X robot that I still kept as a reminder. It sat on my nightstand, a symbol of both crisis and opportunity. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. "They replaced me with a robot," I said softly to the empty room. "So I bought the robot's parent company, and now the machine works for me." But it had become more than that. Now the machine worked for a vision of technology that enhanced humanity rather than diminished it. A vision that was spreading, conversation by conversation, company by company, industry by industry. The robot that was meant to take my place had instead helped me find my purpose. And in that unexpected outcome lay a lesson far more valuable than revenge. Sometimes our greatest setbacks contain the seeds of our most important contributions. I set the robot model back on the nightstand and turned to my computer. There was still work to do, a movement to build, a future to shape. The story that had begun with a dismissal was evolving into something far larger than one person's career trajectory. It was becoming a blueprint for a different relationship between humans and technology, one in which we owned the machines rather than being owned by them. In that ownership lay the true power, not just legal or financial control, but the deeper power to determine purpose, to define values, to shape the very nature of progress itself. It was a power I'd always possessed but had never fully recognized until the moment it was threatened. Now, with that power acknowledged and activated, the real work could begin. Creating a world where technology served human flourishing rather than narrowly defined efficiency. A world where robots worked for us, not just financially or functionally, but philosophically, advancing our deepest values rather than merely eliminating our jobs. They had replaced me with a robot. But in doing so, they had unleashed a force they never anticipated. A vision for technology that put humans at the center rather than the periphery. And that vision, born from professional crisis, had become my most significant contribution. As I closed my laptop and prepared for sleep, I felt a sense of profound gratitude for the journey, every step of it, including the painful ones. The robot had not taken my place after all. Instead, it had helped me find it.